announcement is, go ahead.
I'm just going to make my announcement.
Please, thank you.
So Laura Day and I are going to be hosting with other families yam lunches across the street at University House. We want you guys to come and have a free lunch. We're referred to the first one January 25th. We'll do it once a month. So if you guys play your cards right, you'll have the church potluck and the yam lunch. You guys can do 2 Sundays.
2 free meals a month. So who can argue with that? How many people in here have seen the Star Wars movies? How many people in here have seen The Matrix? How many people have seen Jack Reacher? Okay, so that's all I need to know. So I was going to show some movie clips, but I don't think I'm going to, because I think you have to know storyline. And what I was going to show was out of Jack Reacher. And that would be my question. If just for those of you who are here now, if you had to choose a genre of, really, I'm going to let it be you're reading, you're listening, you're watching, whatever it is, pick a genre of entertainment that you like and tell me what it is. So it can be history, it can be news, it could be action movies, it could be drama. You tell me, and I'll go first. And you're next, so I know you've got it like at the tip of your tongue. So mine right now is history. And it doesn't, there's no right or wrong, and it doesn't have to be like forever, like, oh no, 2 years from now, I've switched genres and this is what I like. What is it now that you're either listening to, reading, thinking about, you're finding entertainment in?
Anything, any kind of action.
Action.
Yeah.
Okay.
Personal growth.
Okay.
Science fiction or fantasy.
Okay.
Yeah. Sports.
Holidays.
S'mores?
Sports.
Okay.
Awesome.
S'mores is a good category, but I'll go with sports. Okay. Suspense? Drama. Action. This is a genre of entertainment in any format that you're into right now.
Comedy.
Yeah, go with comedy.
Okay. All right. Thanks. We're going to talk about Oh, I'm sorry. We forgot the last generation. Kevin? I'll let Connie go first. Connie?
Anything that will help me grow.
Okay. Spiritual growth.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm just looking at the clock and just amazed at how fast that 1 minute exercise took. Last week we started with The Queen You Never Knew, all the you and me and the intro stuff. By way of review, I told you a little bit about me. I asked some questions about you. We talked about goals and objectives, mine and yours. I showed you, and I forgot it. I showed you some of my sources, and I added another book to my source collection, and it's called Brer Rabbit. Has anybody ever read Brer Rabbit? I got one back there. Who else read Brer Rabbit? Okay. That's really too bad that I have my copy and I was going to bring it with me, and I put it on the kitchen table and promptly forgot it. So that's another source, and you'll see how that fits today. We talked about attitudes towards the book of Esther. Christian attitudes and how throughout the centuries they have really led to a lot of anti-Semitism and inspired a lot of negative thought and the pushback that Christian communities have given to the canon of the Book of Esther. We talked about Jewish attitudes and how it has been really a seminal book for Jewish scholars, Jewish communities. We talked about Eastern and Western learning. We talked about how in the Eastern thought, learning is a journey, it's a discovery, and the key question to students and to learners is, are you asking good questions? And in Eastern or in Western thought, the question that learners oftentimes get asked is, did you learn anything? Which is code for, have you memorized the main points that were being presented to you? We also talked about the idea of Eastern thought and Western thought as it relates to God, and how we in the West are so powerfully influenced by the questions of who and what as it relates to God. So give me the bullet point list. Tell me, who is God? Give me his characteristics. Give me the one-word bullet points that describe who he is. Whereas in Eastern thought, in Eastern mindset, the key question is how. How does the creator of the universe relate to his creation? And so that's and I want to just throw out there that in pursuit of God, that's a really good question. How do I see God relating to humanity in the scripture? That will take you a lot further in developing a personal relationship than knowing that he's omniscient and omnipresent and all the words.
I think we have to know together.
Okay.
So that it doesn't get distorted either direction.
I agree with you 100%. It's already distorted, which is why I only mentioned pursue the how, because we have all those words are already memorized. And so just as an alternative. So here's where we left off. History or literature, fact or fiction? What do you think? Who thinks that the Book of Esther is a historical book that is all fact? And who thinks the Book of Esther is a piece of literature and that it is a book of fiction? Show of hands. Fact?
It's interesting you said all facts.
Okay.
It kind of gave me an absolute.
Okay.
All of the Sith feel an absolute.
Okay, so are you approaching it as a book of fact? Are you approaching it as a book of history? Or are you approaching it as a book of fiction or a piece of literature? And who would say they're looking at it as literature or as a piece of fiction? In today's genre, we might call it historical fiction. Okay? I think I got 2 takers in the fiction category and the remainder in the fact category. So let me go through some of the evidence for fiction. There's no extra biblical evidence of a Persian queen or of a queen named Esther or of a Jewish queen of any kind in anything that we find about the Persian Empire. It appears that the king can't make a single decision without getting his counselors involved. And the biggest decisions, like the extermination of an entire population who are paying taxes, just gets left to somebody else. Now, keep in mind, how many of you have seen the movie 300? Okay, I got some. Tell me what the movie 300, pretty quickly, what the movie is about.
against Persia.
Okay, it's the Battle of Thermopylae, which is the second invasion of the Persians over the Greeks. It's when the Greek Empire fell. That battle and that whole conquest that took about 4 years was led by this king. But he's portrayed in this book as a guy who can't make decisions, not the smallest of decisions. It says in this book, when Esther comes to him, we can't reverse the laws of Persia. It would be impossible to rule a land as large as Persia if, in fact, it was impossible to change a law once it's been made, to reverse it. In history, we know that in the Persian Empire, the Romans got this from the Persians. When you conquer a land, you let those people govern themselves, right? So Cyrus the Great let the Judites go back and rebuild the temple, right? It's Cyrus who said to Nebuchadnezzar, or to Nehemiah, you can go back and visit and Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. It was Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, that came and destroyed that temple. But when the Persians came to rule, they sent them back and let them rebuild. And Darius, who was Cyrus's grandson and Xerxes' father, supported that effort and sent supplies to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. And yet we have a story of Darius' son wanting to exterminate a particular racial population. Esther, now this is a lot of people get stuck, scholars. How is it that Esther and Mordecai are living together either as cousins or as niece and uncle? And Mordecai is known to be a Jew. And somehow Esther is able to keep her racial identity secret from the king of the largest empire on the planet for years and years and years. Hey, honey, where are you from? Oh, did you see that picture I brought home today? Isn't it pretty? She just demurs. How many times is this woman going to have to avoid the question of where are you from? What is your background? How many of your friends that are close do you, or your spouse, do you not know what their background is? This is a very strong point for this can't be true. If we're talking about Xerxes, which most scholars agree the king was in fact Xerxes, then his son Artaxerxes was born at a particular time, and if you date this book, if Vashti is his wife, she was pregnant. She was in the middle of her pregnancy when she was asked to come. So there's a lot of debate around whether or not she was asked to come and parade herself in front of the court with no clothes on. But regardless, the timing seems off as it relates to Vashti pregnancy and her disobedience. And then there's a lot of exaggeration in the text. We have very good records that there were 20 satraps or areas of control, states, if you were talking about the United States, within the Persian Empire, 20 of them. But the text in Esther 1 says there were 127 provinces. The text says that the gallows that Haman built to hang Mordecai on or to impale him on were 7 stories. 85 feet tall, and he built them overnight. I don't know if you remember that. He came home for dinner, if you've read the text. He comes home from dinner, he's whining to his friends and his wife. They come up with this plan. He builds the gallows, and then later that night, he goes to see the king. He builds an 85, I mean, I don't know, you're into DIY. I don't know that I could do that as an after dinner project and still meet with with the king afterwards. And then the offer that Haman makes: if you let me exterminate these people, I'll give you 20,000. Was it 20,000? 10,000 talents of silver. That's equivalent to 666,000 pounds of silver. That's what he offered. Now, I don't know what job he has and how well he was being remunerated, but that seems like a lot of money to me. When Alexander came in and conquered the capital there in Susa, which is the Winter Palace, there were 4 capitals of the Empire of Persia, which makes it really big. The one in Susa, the second largest, he took 50,000 talents of silver out of the palace, which is 80%, 20% were being offered, if you will, by Haman. That's a huge amount of money. And I might add, the king said, "That's okay. You don't need to do that. You just do whatever you want. You don't need to remunerate me." So what's the evidence that it's fact? What's the evidence that this is, in fact, a historical book? There are 2 places where we get in the text a statement of time, a timestamp. If you're there, Esther 1, verse 3, can somebody read that?
In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles, the governors of the provinces were before him.
Okay. 3rd year of his reign. Now, I've already given you the answer, but what was happening in the 3rd year of Xerxes' reign?
Egyptian uprising.
There was an Egyptian uprising. It turns out that in Egypt, right after his dad Darius had died, there was an uprising, a rebellion in Egypt, and Xerxes had to go put it down, and it took him 3 years, but he did, and he came back, and he's celebrating. How long did this celebration go on? Does anybody know? It's crazy. What's that? 180 days. That doesn't seem like a lot of days, but if you add them up, that's like 6 months. Let's all party for 6 months. And who's there? Everybody. Everybody, and in particular, his military leaders. So it's quite possible that this was the celebration that they were having for the victory in Egypt. Esther 2, verse 16, the next timestamp we have in the book, the only other timestamp we have in the book.
He was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month of the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign.
Okay, so about October of 10th month, October of his 7th year. Anybody know what he was doing in his 7th year? It's on the screen. Okay, if you have watched the movie 300, he was coming back from that conquest of Greece. He was coming back from that battle of Thermopylae. And he would have arrived back in Persia in about October, and that would be wintertime. And so he would have gone to his winter palace, which is in Susa. So this suggests that this could be actually a pretty accurate record. Whoever wrote the book, it's a very unusual book because it's the only book in the New Testament, or in the entire Bible, that really gives the details of the court and everything that is said about it. there's this scene where she has to go into the throne room. There is this scene where she's having a banquet in a different area. There is right outside of that room where she's having this banquet with Haman, and when Esther and Haman and Xerxes are meeting together and eating together and drinking together. Xerxes gets upset and he walks out into the garden. All of these details, which are what's unusual, is this kind of inner court detail. They're all accurate. They've been borne out by the archaeological record. So, so that suggests that maybe this is an accurate factual account. The indulgent culture of the Persians is validated by history books. The 6-month party seems crazy to me. It would not be based on the things that we find in ancient historical writings, and in particular Herodotus. My favorite is that it was Persian custom. They drank all the time. And when they had political discourse, they always had it twice. The first time, they had it drunk, because there was a belief that if you are inebriated, it strips away all the inhibitions. And so let's all get drunk and decide what laws we should put together. When the assembly is in session, we will have lots of drink, it will flow freely, and then we will talk about policy, and we'll write it all down. And then they debated it a second time when they were sober, but only after they had the first conversation. And if they decided they made stupid decisions while they were drunk, they would scratch those from the record. But this is what Herodotus says about the way that the Persians operated. So very indulgent culture, lots of drinking, free-flowing wine, free-flowing alcohol, all that happens. There's a lot that they have to say about sort of the loose living that happens within those of money in Persia as well. The roads and the communication systems are very accurate. They were famous. They are the precursor to the Pony Express. The Persians were known to raise Arabian horses. Those horses were very fast. They set up the Royal Road was 1,675 miles long. They set up posts where you could get a fresh horse, and they could take communication in about 7 to 9 days across that entire population. And in historical writings, it's exactly the same phrase that's being used in the book of Esther. It was translated into everybody's language. So you have this system brought up in Esther multiple times about how a decree went out throughout the entire empire in everyone's native tongue and everyone's language. That was absolutely a piece of technology that was unique to Persia and very real. Xerxes was known to be monogamous, kinda. There's only one wife that is mentioned. Now keep in mind, Esther, there was a harem in the palace, right? Esther was brought into a harem. She was groomed to be part of the harem. Everyone who was in the beauty contest that Esther participated in was going to be part of this harem. They were going to sleep with the king if he was happy with his time with them in the bedroom. They had a chance to become queen. If not, he was still going to take care of them for the rest of their lives. They would be part of his harem. So, but there's only one wife ever mentioned, and that's a statue of her. Her name is Amestris, and she's mentioned because she gave birth to Artaxerxes. So the question is, was that Vashti? Or was that Esther? Or was there another one in between? Or were there multiple wives, and the only one that gets recorded in history is the one who has the heir? That's why it's, but there's only ever one wife mentioned in the historical text, and it's this person, Demetrius. And Persian has a way when we look at ancient history, you can drop prefixes and you can drop suffixes, and you have the same root word in two different languages. Esther, Amester, if you drop the suffix here, you may have the same person. That, in fact, might be what Esther looked like. And then there are the small details. Anyone who has talked about or studied forensics and eyewitness testimony, it's the details, it's the small details, if they're accurate, that justify eyewitness testimony. Size of the empire stretched from India to Ethiopia, that's very accurate. The communication decrees, every people after their own language is exactly the same way it's recorded in Persian records. The inner cabinet, it's known that Xerxes' father, Darius, had a group of advisors in number 7, or in number 6. He had 6 of them. It says that Xerxes had 7 in this particular account in Esther. Artaxerxes had 6 or 7 as well, so that's very accurate. This idea of a scepter, the reliefs in Persian ancient architecture always show the king with a scepter, and it plays a prominent role in the story. And then it's very well known, oddly enough, that Persian kings, despite their monarchy, their absolute power, it was well known that they rewarded people for good deeds. And that's exactly what happens to Malachi. I mean, it's a key point in this particular story, right? So this is one of the things that the Persian Empire was known for. So, and this is one that I don't read about when I did my research, but for me personally, the fact that the celebration of Purim that we talked about last week, there's 2 full chapters that are devoted specifically to that. That has been celebrated year after year after year after year for thousands of years by the Jewish community. It's part of their yearly synagogue festival season that is done the same over and over and over and has been. And to me, that has a certain testimony of the factual nature of the book. But before we make final conclusions, does anybody recognize this picture? Anybody at all? Ever seen it? You've seen it. Okay. So I would like you're not allowed to answer these questions, but this is going to be a bit of an exercise in critical thinking. And I think it's important. Have you seen this before, Josh? Okay. So this is a bullet map that was created in the Second World War by the naval. And I've got the story here, and you don't need to read it. I'll just tell it to you. But basically, you got a bunch of planes that are getting shot down in the Second World War, and you got a bunch of people who are trying to do a critical analysis when the planes return, and they decided we've got to get data and we've got to understand what's going on, and we've got to fix this problem or we're going to lose this war. And so every plane that came back, they built a bullet map, and that's the bullet map that you see there on the right. And they decided this is perfect. We now have data and we can back up what we're going to do. And what we're going to do is we're going to reinforce the wings, we're going to reinforce the central portion of the fuselage, the body there, and we're going to reinforce the tail fins, and with armor, and then we'll send them back out. Problem is, the analysis was wrong. And I think that it's interesting, I brought this up because there was a Jewish statistician named Abraham Weld who decided to, he looked at this analysis and he said, "You've done it all wrong." Can you guess what might be wrong with their analysis?
those are the planes that were coming back, but what about the ones that actually crashed?
See, you've seen this before. You've heard this story at least, maybe not seen the picture. I'm guessing. Is that true?
For the most part.
Yeah. So it's called survivor bias. We don't have all the data. And our minds tell us we've done a really good job of analysis, but what we don't have is what's missing. And I think that's true about ancient historical records. When we look at the book of Esther, you can make arguments going either way. But what about what we don't have? What about the data that's not there? We can make an assessment about the factual nature of Esther versus the fictional nature of Esther based on the evidence we have. But what we have to always remember is that was how many thousands of years ago? What is it that we don't have? And how do we think about that? So, in conclusion, as it relates to fact or fiction, it's difficult to litigate, right? Because, Herodotus is the first known historian. He wrote a book called The Histories. He wrote it in 430 BCE. He's the primary source of our understanding of Persia. That's 50 years after the book of Esther occurred. So it's possible that Herodotus was able to get eyewitness testimony, people who were still alive, people who lived there, and verify some of these things. But the other thing that I would mention is that Herodotus was Greek, and Greeks and Persians were not friends. I've mentioned twice already this morning that there were multiple conquests of Persia against Greece, and lots of people died, and war is hell and all of that. So, how much is Herodotus writing in a way that is becoming, and how much is a way that is sort of less than becoming of the Persians? Also, to Phil's point earlier when I said, do you believe all of this is fact? We have a particular understanding of the way history should be written. The difference between whether something is history, whether something is story, is a question that's much more important to us than it would have been to any Persian or Greek individual living in those times. Because that's the way they communicated their history, was through story. But we have, our Western thought says you have to put the dates down, you can't embellish anything, you can't, but that's not the way they communicated. And so we can't superimpose our cultural understanding of how history should be written on the ancient historical texts. And finally, there's a treasure trove of Persian documents that have recently been found in real time. They're being translated, and we don't have that information, but they're Persian writings about Persia. So again, coming back to this survivor bias, we don't know what we don't know. I think maybe I could have asked the wrong question, fact or fiction. I'm not sure it's as important to consider, is it fact, is it fiction, but rather, how do we see it both ways? Because it's, again, asking the question, who is God versus how does he relate? And I think that might be the better question and the way to answer it. So, but we have to live with ourselves. We have to live in our own culture. We have to talk to people who are in our own culture, who have been influenced by that. And we have to defend our faith. So, what's the implication? if it's not historically accurate? What assumptions and expectations do you take into inspired writing if it's fact versus fiction? If it's story or literature versus history? Those are questions I think you should wrestle with, and we'll wrestle with in the next 20 minutes a little bit. Does it change our approach? Does it matter? Is it important to know? And let me offer some questions that might help you. What if I told you that the creation story wasn't true? Wasn't a piece of factual writing? What if I told you that the flood wasn't true? Or the Tower of Babel? Or the book of Job? Or the book of Daniel? I'm not saying that. I'm asking you to ask yourself, what would happen to my faith if those books weren't true, if they weren't historical, if they weren't factual? What would that mean? Because you will encounter people who will tell you there are, when I think I taught a class in here on the first couple of chapters of Genesis on the creation story. There are at least 14 different creation stories from different cultures that I found. And many of them use the same names, the same themes as you see in the book of Genesis. What do you do with that? What do you do with that when somebody says, why do you believe the Bible? Why should I believe the Bible? When my son was in his, I don't know, we live in the age of the internet. My son was in his middle school years or something, and he came back to me and he said, I have found 7 different cultural flood stories. None of them say the entire earth was covered with water, but all of them say their entire culture was wiped out because of a flood. Is one right and the other's not? Are they all right? Do you have to put them all together? What if we had a terrible avalanche, snowstorm, whatever, and the entire city of Denver was wiped out and somebody decided to write about it in their diary? And it's the only piece of information that survived. What do you do with that? How do you deal with it? What's the foundation of your faith? Is the historical accuracy of the Bible, or is it the creator of the universe? What is the object of your faith? And now this is a really, I think, important question to wrestle with. If you were God and you wanted to communicate with your creation, now you can speak creation into existence. You can break all laws of physics because you're not governed by them. You stand outside of this universe that you've created, this universe that has over 3 billion galaxies that are the size of our own. We live in a galaxy that takes 47 light years to cross. What that means is a photon can go around the Earth 7.5 times in a second, all the way around the Earth. That's the speed of light. If you're going that fast for 47 years, you'll get to the end of our galaxy. But there are it used to be 300,000. I think now they estimate 3 billion galaxies that size in our universe. Once you can wrap your head around that, recognize that God's on the outside of it. He created it all. He spoke it into existence. Now, you're that God. And you want to communicate with your creation through a text. And you need to communicate with billions of people from all different kinds of cultures throughout the entirety of time as we understand it, with the developments that happen throughout time, and you need to communicate with them in a way that helps you understand who you are within their context and their experiences for all of their experiences. What would your writings look like? Would you pick a single style? Would you write a science text? Would you write a history text? Would you just come up with a piece of literature? Um,
Yeah, I don't think I
Go ahead.
would change anything. I
About
think I would write, I mean, however it is now, I think that's what God intended, so.
right. Well, I guess the question is the answer is all of it, right? I'd write a science book. I'd write a history book. I'd write some poetry. I'd write some stories. I write it, I would cover all the bases, all the experiences, and I'd write it in such a way that it contained truth about how I relate to my creation. And I would write it in such a way that lets them know I understand who they are, right? I know who you are. And that has been the problem with the book of Esther and its acceptance within the Christian community is we've had a hard time understanding that. We in the West and our culture has influenced us to think not about just who we are, but we always want to project our aspirational self. We always want to be somebody different, to be somebody better. And when we look at Esther, it doesn't fit. Esther's just a little too raw, a little too real. And we're going to talk about that next. So here's where I wanted to be at the end of last class. So about 40 minutes ago, I wanted to be there. So we'll see, and I've cut this class in half. We'll see if I can make it. We're going to, for those of you who may not find this kind of lecture at this point before we get into the text that stimulating, and just to make sure that you know how long your nap needs to be, I've got four, there's the outline. We're going to talk about some background, we're going to talk about hidden text, we're going to talk about humor and laughter, we're going to talk about play, and then we'll draw some conclusions. Let me just start from the beginning. Just because we are from the West, I'll tell you, here's the main point. Esther is a book of comedy. It is meant to be funny. It provokes laughter. It just does. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. There's lots of different kinds of comedy. I saw this definition. I think this is a really good one. This came out of I think it's Adele Berlin, the Jewish commentator from the Jewish Publication Society, said she likes this definition of burlesque. It's an artistic composition that for the sake of laughter vulgarizes lofty material or treats ordinary material with mock dignity. That is in contrast to satire, which also is mocking and also is vulgarizing. But in satire, there's judgment. But within burlesque, it's not intended to be judgmental. And that's why, anyway, that's the main difference there. And then what you see, if you use that definition and you look at the book of Esther, all the achievements that are praiseworthy in the Persian Empire, they're all mocked. The decrees that go out, the crisis of state. The queen didn't show up when the king called her. So we need to send out a new law that says every husband, the wife has to obey her. Okay, is this really is this really an empire crisis? A domestic disagreement between Vashti and And a decree goes out that on a certain day, the general population is going to go to war with their neighbors. These are the two big decrees that go out, right, in the story. It's completely mocked, as is so many other things, as we see when we get into the text. As a way of background, Esther is considered to be post-exilic book of the Bible, which includes Esther, Nehemiah, Ezra, the Chronicles, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. What does that mean, post-exilic? Thank you, after the exile. Not that hard, right? Tell me about the exile. Anybody in a minute or two? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. So ABC, okay? I think it's ABC. No, it's A and B. Let's just go AB. The first conquest of Israel, about 1,000 years BC, 920, I think, or 960, 920. I'll put it up in a second. You have this split, right? Almost right after Saul's reign ends, you have this split, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. You've got 10 tribes in the north. You've got 2 tribes in the south. The 10 tribes in the north decide that they don't want to fit under God's rule. And ultimately, they get taken first. And they get taken by the Assyrians. The Assyrians carry them away. But then along come the Babylonians. The Babylonians conquer the Assyrians, so they get those 10 tribes. But then they also come and there's a revolt at the time, interestingly enough. So you've got the 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, in the southern kingdom. They last, but the 10 tribes get dispersed into the Assyrian kingdom. 300 years later, in 707 BC, Sennacherib, Assyrian, conquers the northern kingdom. And then another 100 years later, along comes the Babylonians, and they conquer Assyria. But then Zedekiah decides that he's going to team up with Egypt, and he's not going to have any of this conquered nation status. And so he refuses to pay tribute to Babylon, so Nebuchadnezzar comes in and invades and conquers. He carries away the last 2 tribes. And then I put that in brown, 586, because that is a known date. That is, some of these other ones you get arguments among people, but nobody argues that the temple was destroyed in 586. That was written, that was documented. The temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Cyrus the Great comes along in 539, so 50 years later, and he conquers Persia. Or he's the king of Persia, and he conquers Babylon. And that empire lasts for, 500 to 200 years, right? Until Alexander the Great comes along. Cyrus the Great, Cyrus the Second those are the same people, allows the Judites to go back and rebuild the temple. I mentioned that earlier. The temple is rebuilt in 520. It's completed. Xerxes is 3 dynasties later. He becomes the king of Persia in 486. 3 years later, Vashti is deposed, right? Because it tells us in Esther 1:3 that it was the 3rd year of the reign that Vashti gets deposed. 579, if you do the calculations based on Esther 2:16, she becomes the queen of Persia. And in 530, 50 years later, Herodotus publishes his histories book, the first historical account that we have in history. So the big question in the post-exilic period, what's the big question amongst Hebrews? So you're Jewish. You've got this whole national story about the Exodus, about the slavery, 400 years, about monotheism coming about, the God of Israel, Yahweh, has appeared on the scene. He's brought you into the desert. You wander for 40 years. You conquer the nation, or the territory that is, now known as Palestine, as the Promised Land. God has said you're going to be disobedient. If you're disobedient, I'm going to carry you away. If you are obedient, all will be good. The former is the path that was chosen, unfortunately, and now all 12 tribes have been carried away into exile. What do you think the big question is?
Where's God?
Where is God? Okay.
I was gonna say, I would be thinking, I thought we were supposed to be the chosen people.
I thought we were the chosen.
How do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah. I guess the question is, now that we've been carried away and we've been taken into exile and we've been basically turned into property of other people for hundreds of years, are we still God's people? Does he still care about us? Are we still the chosen ones? And all those writings, which includes Esther, is asking that question. Are we still God's people? Where is he? Well, in the 1990s, there's this politician, philosopher, James C. Scott, who wrote something called the Domination, the Art of Resistance. And he defined something called hidden transcripts, which he said is a way through literature that oppressed people cope, they survive through hidden transcripts. And motifs of hidden transcripts are within those writings, within those stories, the world is turned upside down. There's a total role reversal. The first becomes last, the last becomes first. There's a sense of revenge fantasy. Oftentimes, there's a trickster figure within hidden transcripts. And then, of course, there's joking and humor. If you were to think about what you know about the Bible and ask if there was a hidden transcript in there somewhere, where might you find one? And this is not a rhetorical question. Thank you, Esther. Right? All those things are there. Like the very, role reversal, the idea that the gallows that Haman built for Mordecai end up, who hangs on them? Haman himself, right? Turned right around. You get you get this decree against the Jews, but it doesn't work. Who ends up being the conqueror? The Jews, right? There's this revenge fantasy. You've got this whole tension building up against people who want to destroy the Jews. Who's the trickster? Who's the trickster in Esther? I would say it's Esther. Esther turns the tables so many times, right? She ultimately she plays this, as I said, demure role with the king, and ultimately says somebody's trying to. She outsmarts Haman, right? And anybody know? Oh, I already asked that. Nobody read Briar Rabbit. Briar Rabbit is Briar Rabbit. Those were a series of stories told in the deep South during the days of slavery about a rabbit. Briar meant brother. And the stories are about Briar Rabbit, Briar Bear, Briar Fox. And they're stories about how Briar Rabbit outsmarts and outwits these other animals that are ultimately, he's in survival mode. The very first one that opens up, the Briar Fox plants a beautiful field of peanuts, and he knows that somebody is going to try and steal his peanuts, and because he's seen a hole in his fence, and Briar Rabbit has created that hole, and Briar Rabbit's come in, and he comes in, so he sets a trap for him, and Briar Rabbit gets caught by the trap after he's stolen all the peanuts, and he's hanging there, and Briar Bear comes along, and it's just like who's the dude that had the Tom Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer painting the fence, right? Don't you wish you could paint the fence? Oh boy, you should. This is just so much fun. It's the trickster kind of attitude, and that's exactly what you see in. And it's a way of communicating that we can survive if we're smart enough. We just have to be smarter than. So this chap, James C. Scott, studied, what would I call that? Laos and Vietnam and the oppressed people there, and he wrote a lot about the weapon of the oppressed and the the moral economy of the peasant, and the thinking like the state, the weapons of the weak, thinking like the state, the art of not being governed. So those of you who aspire to anarchy, I mean, you need to be reading Scott's work if that's what you think. That brings us to humor and laughter. I'm thinking we should stop. I'll go through this slide and then I'm going to fast forward. There are 3 reasons we laugh: superiority, and needless to say, when you feel superior, you laugh. Even when you're on the underside of domination, which is where these people were when this book was written. We can't really relate to that. Laughing destabilizes the oppressor. It says, I am stronger than you think I am. I am more superior than you think I am. It also serves as a relief valve. It dissipates tension. Sometimes we see this in people when they get up to speak and they're in the middle of a conversation and they're just tense. I mean, a lot of anxiety going on. You laugh. It's still a way that we relieve tension. It's a survival strategy when you get through tense situations. And then there's incongruity, the reaction to the absurd. Sometimes it's the absurdity between what should be or what you expect and the reality of the situation. And imagine if you were, in fact, a piece of property as a human being, and there was a decree that you were going to be just exterminated. I mean, how absurd is that? How do you deal with that? I will tell you, in life, you will come into situations where you will be asking yourself, where is God? I don't understand this. I am suffering. This is very difficult for me. But unfortunately, Christian theology's view of laughter has been overwhelmingly negative. We do not know how to look at Scripture and laugh and find it funny. It seems absurd. It seems incongruent with the way we think that we have to be sober and serious about the Scripture. And this is a really hard, I mean, I struggle with it myself. I talk to people who say, yes, I understand that that Esther is a book of comedy. And those people who understand that, they look at me and they say, yes, it's very funny. We miss it. We miss it. We're going to talk more about that next week. We'll pick up and we'll talk about the barriers to Christian attitude towards laughter and why we can't seem to get there. But I'm going to have to, unfortunately,